Hi everyone, for this video I'm going to show you how you can paint this lovely aged wood recipe on your miniatures and terrain pieces. I'm Brushstroke and you're watching Brushstroke Painting Guides. Okay, no preamble, let's get into painting, and the first thing I've done is I've primed my miniature piece with a pale grey primer. Specifically, I've used light ghost grey surface primer from Vallejo. I've opted for a pale grey because it will make the colours I paint over it brighter. However, if you do prefer a darker, more moody vibe, then this recipe will work just as well over a black primer. And the first step for painting the wood is I'm going to apply an all-over base coat of dryad bark from Games Workshop. As always, I've thinned my paint on my palette so that it now flows cleanly from my brush and will settle nice and evenly across the surface of my model. As you can see, I'm applying the base coat with a brush, and I've opted for my larger brush so that I can cover this piece as easily as possible. But if you are fortunate enough to have an airbrush, then of course you can save yourself some time and apply this base coat using that instead. As I'm using a brush though, I'm taking care to make sure that I get the paint into all the corners and recesses of this model, as I want to have a solid, even coverage across the whole of the wood details. This particular model has a wonderful textured grain surface which will look great once painted up, but it does mean that it can trap little air bubbles as I brush my paint on. This is something I'm watching out for, as if left unchecked it can lead to small holes forming when the paint dries. So if you can, just encourage them to pop with your brush, or if they are particularly stubborn, then a little gentle blow over them will make them pop. As a final pointer, if you are painting a large model or terrain piece like this, I would recommend that you try and paint in a systematic way so that you can avoid painting over areas where the paint is already starting to dry. I try and work from one end of the piece to the other, painting a small area at a time. In this case, I'm painting in the direction of the grooves of each plank, which helps the paint go on more smoothly, and I can easily paint a plank and then move on to the next. The first coat will often look a little patchy, and that's fine. Resist the temptation to lather more paint on immediately, as you'll risk disturbing the paint already there and possibly make it clump up. Instead, it's much better to simply come back to it once it's dry and apply another coat. Which is exactly what I did with this piece. I went back over and applied a second coat to ensure I had an even solid coverage across the whole of the model. And with that base coat applied, you should have something looking like this. As this video is just about the wood recipe, I'm just going to paint in the other details on this catapult quickly now, as I'll be detailing the full process of painting this whole model in a later video. So be sure and hit that subscribe button if you don't want to miss that. Okay, with those details now painted in, I can move on to the next step for painting the wood, and that is going to be applying a dry brush. So of course for this I'm going to need my texture palette and my moistening pad, as I'll be wanting the bristles on my dry brush to be slightly damp. So I'm just going to quickly remove that excess water on the back of my hand, and then I'm ready to dry brush. And the colour I'm going to use for this is going to be Gawthor Brown from Games Workshop. Okay, I'm going to take a fair bit of paint onto my brush and work that into the bristles on my palette. As for this step, I'm going to be applying a heavy dry brush over the whole of the wood surface. Quick check on the back of my hand, and I'm good to start applying it to my model. Using a fast flicking action back and forth across the texture of the surface so that the bristles are very lightly catching those peaks and not the recesses. It's important to always start with a very light pressure first, barely touching the surface, and then once you're happy with how much paint is coming off your brush, you can steadily apply more pressure as required. If you're new to the technique of dry brushing, or would like to know more about the advantages of using damp bristles on your brush and the difference of light and heavy dry brushing, then be sure to check out my deep dive video into dry brushing, which I'll link at the end of this recipe guide. For now though, I'm again systematically working my way around the model, building up that dry brushing to all the wooden areas and letting it accentuate all that wonderful textured detail. On larger pieces like this, do take your time and try not to rush through this stage. Although it is nice and simple to do, it is important to give it time and care so that you get a nice clean and even finish to all the details. Also, be sure to take care not to apply too much pressure or be too violent with the back and forth flicking when dry brushing any small or fragile details on the model, as you wouldn't want to accidentally break anything. Okay, with that dry brushing done, you should have something looking like this, which means we can move on to the next step, which is going to be applying a wash to all over the wood details to help darken down all those recesses and further bring out all of the texture. And for this, I'm going to use some Agrax Earthshade from Games Workshop. Okay, again for this step, I'm going to be very systematic and controlled with my application of this wash, as things can very quickly run out of control when applying a wash over a large model like this. The temptation can be just to start slapping the wash over everything because you know it all needs to be washed anyway. But if you do that, you run the risk of the wash over pooling up, or worse still, running out of control all over the model and making a real mess. Instead, I'm going to apply the wash to a detail at a time. In this case, for example, I can pick out each plank one at a time. This means not only can I ensure I get a nice even coverage to each plank, but it means I can also keep track of just how much wash I have on the model currently and monitor if it's running into places I don't want it to. Another advantage of doing it this way is it vastly reduces the risk of creating ugly watermarks from the wash drying, because the wet line of my wash will always be at the edge of a detail, meaning that the wash won't dry and leave an ugly line across an area because it dried before I'd finished painting in that whole area. So all I'm going to do is work my way around the whole of the model, taking care to let the wash settle into all of the grooves, creases and recesses whilst painting each plank at a time. Of course, by now many of you will have spotted an issue with how I'm doing this, and that's how am I going to apply the wash to the areas I'm currently holding my model piece by, because I can't simply switch and hold it elsewhere because those bits will be wet and still drying. And the answer is simple, but a little bit more time consuming. I'll just have to wait and allow the rest of the model to fully dry before I can apply the wash to those areas, unfortunately. And then wait again for those to dry fully before moving on to the next stage. And with everything now washed and fully dried, you should have something looking like this, which, if you are painting to a tabletop standard, is a great place to leave it. However, if you do want to push it a little bit further and really make things pop, then we can move on to the next step, which is going to be dry brushing again, this time with some Steel Legion Drab from Games Workshop. This time though, I'm wanting a lighter dry brushing than I did before, and I'm going to be more focused on where I want to apply my dry brushing. I'm still using the damp bristle texture board method to ensure a smooth, non-chalky result, but this time I want to focus my dry brushing to the middle of the planks and leave a little of the previous darker tone showing at the ends where it forms a corner or angle with another plank. The end result being the planks should look brighter towards the middle and more shadowed in those corners. This is in fact much easier to do in practice than it might sound, because to do a lighter dry brush I simply reduce the pressure I'm applying to the surface, which means less of the details receive paint and the bristles won't actually reach the deeper corners and angles I'm wanting to avoid. So I'm again just going to work my way around the whole of the model using my reduced pressure, and you should end up with a result that looks like this. Leading on to the next step, which is actually going to be another dry brushing, even lighter than before this time though, and for this I'm going to use some Baneblade Brown from Games Workshop. Okay, so for this final dry brushing, I want just the slightest amount of paint on my bristles, and I'm going to do the lightest of dry brushing so that it barely catches the surface. I'm particularly focusing this time on the sharpest edges of things to really try and give the neatest, sharpest highlights to the wood details I can. I'm just going to work my way around the whole of the model and very, very lightly dry brush all of those sharp details and then move on to the next step. And when that's done, it's looking pretty nice. but there's one final magic step which really pushes it up to the next level, and that's applying a recessed shade of null oil from Games Workshop. Okay, so what I'm going to do for this final step is I'm going to apply the black wash into all of the gaps and grooves between each plank. This is to establish a clearer definition between each plank and introduce a darker shadow so that the planking is easier to read. Depending on the size of the model or terrain piece you are painting, this step can be a bit time consuming, but it is 100% worth the effort, as it really makes all the difference to the end result. So be patient, take your time and run that black wash into all of the edges around each plank. You also want to run the wash into each of the corners and around the edges of any details which sit on top of the wood, so that everything has a lovely darkened outline. And once that's dry, the wood is complete and you're able to then go on and finish off any other details on the model, like in this case the ropes and metalwork, which will in fact actually make the wood stand out even more. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful. If you did, then please do hit that like button and make sure to share it with all your hobby friends so that they can benefit from it too. If you'd like to help support me make more of these videos, then please consider becoming a channel member like these amazing people did. If you have enjoyed this video and you would like to see more, then please hit the subscribe button, not forgetting of course to click the notification bell to ensure that you're told whenever I post another video. Speaking of other videos, I would love it if you stayed on my channel, so why not check out that dry brushing deep dive video I mentioned earlier, which will take all of the mystery out of the technique and have you dry brushing like a master in no time. Or perhaps check out my latest step-by-step painting guide and let's continue our painting journey together. Thanks again for watching, and I really hope to see you again soon.